The first time Marcus Webb saw an alien ship, he was fixing a broken tractor on his farm in Kansas. The shadow fell across the wheat fields like a dark cloud, and when he looked up, his wrench slipped from his hand and landed in the dirt. The ship was enormous, shaped like a black triangle, and it blocked out half the sky. That was 3 years ago. Now Marcus stood in chains on a platform made of cold metal, surrounded by creatures from 100 different worlds. His hands were bound behind his back, and his face was bruised from the beatings. But his eyes were still sharp, still defiant, and he refused to look away from the towering figure on the throne before him. The galactic tyrant Zorvax was not what Marcus had expected. He had imagined something monstrous, something ugly and twisted. But Zorvax was beautiful in a terrible way, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that burned with cold white fire. He stood 12 feet tall, draped in robes made from the flags of conquered worlds, and when he spoke, his voice echoed through the massive chamber like thunder. "This is the creature that destroyed my fleet at Station Omega," Zorvax asked, and there was amusement in his voice. "This small, soft thing from that backward planet." The aliens around the throne room laughed. Marcus recognized some of them from the reports he had seen during the Resistance. There were the Velthari, tall and thin with too many arms. There were the Groks, massive and covered in gray scales. There were dozens of other species, all of them serving the tyrant who had conquered their worlds and broken their spirits. Marcus said nothing. He had learned that silence was often the best weapon. "Bring him closer," Zorvax commanded. 2 guards grabbed Marcus by the arms and dragged him forward. He stumbled on the steps but kept his balance, refusing to fall. When he stood before the throne, close enough to feel the cold that radiated from the tyrant's body, he finally spoke. "My name is Marcus Webb," he said. "I'm a farmer from Earth, and I'm the one who's going to end your empire." The laughter stopped. Zorvax leaned forward on his throne, and for a moment something like curiosity flickered in those burning eyes. "Bold words for a creature in chains," the tyrant said. "Tell me, Marcus Webb the farmer, do you know how many worlds I have conquered? Do you know how many species have knelt before me, begging for mercy I do not possess?" "I know the numbers," Marcus replied. 417 inhabited worlds, 62 billion sentient beings under your control, 17 species completely eliminated because they refused to submit. Zorvax smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Marcus had ever seen. "You have done your research. Then you know that no one has ever successfully defied me. No one has ever stood against my armies and lived to tell the tale." "That's not entirely true," Marcus said. 3 years ago, your invasion fleet came to Earth, 20,000 ships. They expected to conquer us in a week. The silence in the throne room grew heavy. Marcus could feel the tension from the alien servants and soldiers around him. This was not a story they liked to remember. "It took us 6 months," Marcus continued, "but we sent them running. We destroyed 9,000 of your ships. We captured 3,000 more. And the rest fled back to whatever hole they crawled out of." Zorvax's smile faded. "A temporary setback. My generals were careless. They underestimated your species." "They weren't the only ones," Marcus said. "When your second fleet came, the one you led personally, we were ready. That's when I destroyed Station Omega and crippled your command ship. That's why you had to retreat again." A murmur ran through the crowd. Marcus saw fear in some of the alien faces, quickly hidden. He saw something else too, something he had hoped to find. He saw hope. "You were captured on a scouting mission," Zorvax said, and his voice had grown cold. "Your ship was damaged, your crew was killed, and now you are here, alone and helpless. What do you think you can accomplish?" Marcus looked around the throne room, taking in the faces of the conquered species. He saw the Velthari with their sad, sunken eyes. He saw the Groks with their scarred hides. He saw a small group of beings he didn't recognize, blue-skinned and delicate, who watched him with something like wonder. "I'm not here to accomplish anything," Marcus said. I'm here to send a message." "And what message is that?" Marcus straightened his spine, ignoring the pain from his injuries. "That humans don't give up. That we don't surrender. That no matter how powerful you think you are, there will always be someone willing to stand against you." Zorvax laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "Pretty words, but words do not win wars. Strength wins wars. Power wins wars. And I have more of both than you can possibly imagine." "Maybe," Marcus said, "but there's something you don't have, something you've never had." "And what is that?" Marcus smiled, and it was the first time he had smiled since his capture. "Friends." Before Zorvax could respond, an explosion rocked the throne room. The lights flickered, alarms began to wail, and the massive doors at the far end of the chamber burst open. Through the smoke and debris, Marcus saw figures rushing in, some human and some alien, all of them armed and all of them wearing the symbol of the resistance. At their head was a woman Marcus knew well, Commander Elena Vasquez, his second in command, the finest soldier Earth had ever produced. She was firing her plasma rifle with deadly accuracy, cutting down Zorvax's guards before they could react. "Marcus," she shouted, "get down." Marcus threw himself to the floor as more explosions tore through the throne room. The chains on his wrists sparked and fell away, cut by a precision laser from somewhere in the chaos. He rolled to his feet, grabbing a fallen guard's weapon, and joined the fight. It was over in minutes. When the smoke cleared, the throne room was littered with the bodies of guards and soldiers. Zorvax himself had fled through a hidden passage, surrounded by his personal guard, but the message had been sent, and everyone who witnessed it would remember. "You took your time," Marcus said to Elena as she approached. "Traffic was terrible," she replied with a grin. "Half the galaxy between us and this flying fortress. Next time, try not to get captured." Marcus looked around at the survivors. The alien servants and prisoners were staring at them with expressions of shock and wonder. The small blue-skinned beings had gathered together, and one of them stepped forward hesitantly. "You are the humans," she said, her voice musical and soft. "You are the ones who fight back." "That's us," Marcus said. "We have heard stories," the blue being continued. "We thought they were myths, tales told to give false hope to the conquered." "They're not myths," Elena said. "We're real and we're here to help." The blue being looked at her companions, then back at the humans. "My people are the Ilari. We were conquered 50 years ago. Our world was burned, our cities destroyed. We have waited so long for someone to stand against him." Marcus put his hand on her shoulder, feeling the trembling beneath her skin. "The waiting is over. Come with us, and we'll show you how to fight back." The Ilari looked at him with tears in her strange, beautiful eyes. "Why? Why would you risk so much for beings you have never met?" It was a question Marcus had been asked many times since the war began, by aliens who couldn't understand human psychology, by his own people who thought the fight was hopeless, even by himself in the dark moments when doubt crept in. But the answer was always the same. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said. "Because someone has to stand up to evil even when it seems impossible, because hope matters." The Ilari wiped her eyes and nodded. "Then we will follow you, Marcus Webb of Earth. We will learn to fight as you fight." "Good," Marcus said. He looked at Elena and the other resistance fighters. "Let's get out of here before Zorvax regroups. We have a long way to go, and this is just the beginning." As they moved through the corridors of the fortress, fighting their way to the hangar where their ships waited, Marcus thought about the farm he had left behind on Earth. The wheat fields under the blue sky, the old tractor he had never finished fixing, the simple, peaceful life he had known before the aliens came. He missed it sometimes, but he knew he couldn't go back, not until the war was won, not until the galaxy was free. The first human to defy the galactic tyrant walked through the flames and the chaos, surrounded by allies from a dozen different worlds, and he didn't look back. 3 weeks after the rescue from Zorvax's fortress, Marcus stood on the bridge of the Resistance flagship, a captured alien warship that the humans had renamed the Liberty. The ship was enormous, nearly 2 kilometers long, and it carried fighters, troops, and weapons stolen from 100 different battles. But its most valuable cargo was something that couldn't be measured in tonnage or firepower. Below them, in the converted cargo holds and passenger quarters, were refugees from 30 different species, the Alari who had joined them on the fortress, a group of Velthari engineers who had escaped from a slave camp, Grok's warriors who had broken their conditioning and remembered what it meant to be free, and dozens of others, each with their own story of suffering under Zorvax's rule. They had come to the humans because of stories, tales that had spread across the galaxy like wildfire since Earth's first victory. Stories about a small, primitive planet that had beaten back the tyrant's invasion. Stories about humans who fought without fear, who never surrendered, who treated their enemies with mercy and their allies with kindness. "You look worried," Alina said, joining Marcus at the observation window. "I'm always worried," he replied. "We're fighting the largest empire in the galaxy with a handful of ships and a bunch of refugees who have never held a weapon." "That's not what's bothering you." Marcus sighed. Alina knew him too well. They had fought side by side for 3 years, first in the defense of Earth and then in the growing resistance movement. She could read his moods better than anyone. "Zorvax is coming," he said. "Our intelligence reports say he's gathering his fleet for a major offensive. Not against Earth this time, against us, against the resistance." Alina nodded slowly. "How many ships?" 50,000 at least, maybe more. "And we have 200 combat-capable vessels, another 100 that might survive a fight if we're lucky." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars drift past the window. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between galaxies, the tyrant was planning their destruction. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Marcus asked finally. "Your farm." He smiled slightly. "No, I keep thinking about the first alien I ever talked to. Do you remember? After the invasion was beaten back when we captured that Velthari commander." Alina nodded. "Commander Jex, you spent 3 days with him in the interrogation room." "Not interrogating him," Marcus said. "Just talking. He was terrified at first. He thought we were going to torture him the way Zorvax's forces torture prisoners. When I brought him coffee and sandwiches, he started crying. He said no one had ever shown him kindness." "I remember. He told me about his home world, about the invasion 50 years ago, how his parents were killed, how he was taken as a child and raised to serve the Empire. He'd never known anything else. He thought cruelty was just the way the universe worked." Alina put her hand on his arm. "He's the one who gave us the coordinates for the slave camps on Zethrix Prime. Because of him, we saved 200,000 people." "Because I showed him that there was another way," Marcus said. "Because I treated him like a person instead of an enemy." "That's always been your greatest weapon, Marcus. Not guns or ships or strategy, just basic human decency." He turned to face her. "That's exactly what worries me. We're about to face 50,000 ships. There's no amount of decency that can stop that kind of firepower. At some point, this war is going to come down to killing, and I don't know if we can kill enough of them to survive." Before Alina could respond, an alarm began to sound throughout the ship. A young officer ran onto the bridge, his face pale with fear. "Commander Webb, we're picking up distress signals from the Relio system. Zorvax's forces are attacking." Marcus was already moving toward the command chair. "How many ships?" "Unknown, sir. But the signals are coming from the Grok's resistance cell. They're asking for help." "The Groks," Alina frowned. "That's in deep territory. If we go there, we'll be days away from any friendly port." "I know," Marcus said, "but those are our allies. We can't leave them to die." He looked around the bridge at his crew. Humans from a dozen different countries, working side by side with aliens from species that had been enemies just years before. They were all watching him, waiting for his decision. "Set a course for Relios," he ordered, "maximum speed, and send word to every resistance cell in range. Anyone who can fight, we need them." The Liberty jumped to hyperspace, and Marcus watched the stars stretch into lines of light. They were racing toward a battle they probably couldn't win, to save allies they barely knew, against an enemy that outnumbered them 100 to 1. It was exactly the kind of situation humans were best at. The Relio system was burning when they arrived. The Grok's home world, a massive planet covered in rocky deserts and underground cities, was surrounded by enemy ships. Zorvax's fleet hung in space like a cloud of black locusts, firing down at the planet's surface, destroying everything they could target. But the Groks were fighting back. Their ships were old and outdated, relics from before the conquest, but they were fighting with desperate fury. And they weren't alone. "Sir," the sensor officer called out, "I'm picking up more signals, friendly signals." Marcus stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Ships were arriving from all directions. Velthari cruisers from the outer reaches, Ilari shuttles from the refugee convoys, human fighters from Earth's defense fleet, somehow having crossed half the galaxy to join the battle. "How many?" he asked. "Over 300 vessels, sir, and more coming." Elena laughed, a sound of pure joy. They heard the call, they all heard the call. Marcus opened a communication channel to all ships. "This is Marcus Webb of the Resistance. To all who have come to fight today, thank you. I know many of you have traveled far and risked much to be here. I know many of you have never fought in a battle like this before." He paused, looking at the enemy fleet on the display. 50,000 ships, just as intelligence had predicted, maybe more. "But I also know that every one of you has suffered under Zorvax's rule. Every one of you has lost something precious. Family, friends, freedom, hope." The channel crackled with responses from dozens of species, all listening. "Today we take it back. Today we show the galaxy that the conquered can rise, that the oppressed can fight. That hope is stronger than fear." He stood from his chair and faced the window, facing the enemy fleet. "All ships attack formation, for freedom, for the future, for everyone who couldn't be here to fight beside us." The resistance fleet surged forward, 300 ships against 50,000, and the Battle of Relios began. What happened next would become legend. Not because of the tactics or the strategy or the weapons used, but because of what it revealed about the beings who fought that day. The Groks, who had been conquered and broken 60 years before, remembered what it meant to be warriors. They threw their ancient ships against the enemy with abandon, protecting the transports that carried their families to safety. The Velthari, whose many arms had been forced to build weapons for the tyrant, now used those same arms to pilot ships and fire guns and rescue wounded allies from the chaos. The Ilari, delicate and peaceful by nature, served as medics and communications officers, their musical voices coordinating the battle across 100 frequencies. And the humans led the charge, as they always did. Small, soft, short-lived creatures who had somehow learned to fight harder and longer than anyone thought possible. Marcus flew his own fighter into the heart of the battle. He had been a farmer before the war, but 3 years of combat had made him one of the deadliest pilots in the fleet. He dodged enemy fire, destroyed targets of opportunity, and directed the battle from the front lines rather than the safety of the command ship. "Marcus, you're too exposed." Elena's voice crackled over the radio. "Fall back to the Liberty." "Can't do that," he replied, rolling his fighter to avoid a missile. "The troops on the ground need cover. I'm staying." Below them, on the surface of the Grok's home world, landing parties were fighting to evacuate civilians from the underground cities. Enemy troops were trying to stop them, but the resistance fighters were holding the line. The battle raged for hours. Ships exploded in silent flowers of light. Pilots died with curses and prayers on their lips, but slowly, impossibly, the enemy began to fall back. "They're retreating," someone shouted on the comm. "The enemy is retreating." Marcus looked at the tactical display through exhausted eyes. It was true. The enemy fleet, still vastly outnumbering them, was pulling away from the planet. They weren't defeated, just withdrawing. But why? The answer came moments later, when a massive ship emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. It was the largest vessel Marcus had ever seen, a dreadnought shaped like a spear, covered in symbols of death and conquest. "That's the Throne of Night," Elena said, her voice suddenly quiet. "Zorvax's personal flagship." The tyrant had come. A communication signal overrode all channels, and suddenly Zorvax's voice filled every ship in both fleets. "Marcus Webb of Earth, you have impressed me. Few have ever done so." Marcus opened his own channel. "I'm not trying to impress you, I'm trying to stop you." An admirable goal, a foolish one but admirable nonetheless. The Throne of Night began moving toward them, slowly and deliberately. The enemy fleet reformed around it, creating a wall of ships between the dreadnought and the resistance. "I offer you a choice," Zorvax continued. "Surrender now, and I will spare the worlds you seek to protect. Continue this futile resistance, and I will burn every planet that has supported you. Every species that has aided you will be eliminated. Every hope you have kindled will be extinguished." Marcus looked at the tactical display, at the hundreds of ships that had answered his call, at the planet below, where millions of Groks were waiting to see what would happen. "What's your answer, farmer?" Zorvax asked. Marcus thought about his home, about the wheat fields and the blue sky and the simple life he had left behind, about all the reasons he had never wanted to be a soldier or a leader or a symbol. And then he thought about the Ilari woman on the fortress, wiping tears from her eyes and asking why humans would risk so much for strangers. "My answer," he said, "is no. No. We don't surrender, we don't quit, and we don't make deals with tyrants." There was a long silence on the channel. "Then you choose death," Zorvax said finally, "for yourself and everyone who follows you." "Maybe," Marcus replied, "but that's our choice to make, and there's something you should understand, Zorvax, something important." "And what is that?" Marcus smiled, even though no one could see it. "We're not afraid of you, we were never afraid of you, and that's why you're going to lose." He closed the channel and turned to his fleet. "All ships prepare for engagement. Today we show them what freedom looks like." The Resistance fleet charged forward once more, into the heart of the enemy formation, toward the Throne of Night and the tyrant who sat upon it. And across the galaxy, beings who had never known hope began to believe that things could change. The Throne of Night loomed before them like a dark god, and Marcus Webb flew straight toward it. The fighting around them was chaos. Ships exploded in every direction. Wreckage tumbled through space, spinning slowly in the silent vacuum. But Marcus had eyes only for the dreadnought, for the tyrant who sat at its heart. "Marcus, this is insane," Elena's voice crackled over the radio. "That thing has more firepower than our entire fleet." "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm going alone." "What?" "Keep the fleet engaged with the enemy ships. I need a clear path to the throne." "You can't possibly think you can destroy it with one fighter." "I don't need to destroy it. I just need to get inside." There was a long pause on the channel. When Elena spoke again, her voice was heavy with understanding. "You're going to board it. You're going to try to kill him yourself. It's the only way. As long as Zorvax lives, the Empire will continue. Cut off the head and maybe the body will fall. Or maybe you'll die for nothing." Marcus dodged a burst of enemy fire, feeling his fighter shake from a near miss. "Then make sure it's not for nothing. If I fail, you take command. You keep fighting. Promise me." Another long pause. "I promise." Marcus smiled. "Tell the others I'm proud of them. Tell them this was worth it, every bit of it." He cut the channel and accelerated toward the throne of night. The enemy ships tried to stop him, but the resistance pilots flew interference, clearing a path through the chaos. Velthari cruisers absorbed fire meant for his tiny fighter. Grok's warriors rammed their vessels into enemy formations, creating gaps in the defense. Ilari pilots who had never held a weapon before joining the resistance flew with desperate skill, buying him precious seconds. And then he was through. The massive bulk of the dreadnought filled his entire view, and he could see the hangar bays along its spine, the vulnerable entry points that had appeared in captured intelligence reports. He aimed for the largest one and hit the afterburners. The fighter screamed through the hangar shields and crashed into the deck, skidding across the metal floor in a shower of sparks. Marcus was thrown against his restraints, feeling bones crack, tasting blood, but he was alive. He pulled himself from the wreckage and checked his weapons. A plasma pistol, 2 grenades, a combat knife, not much against an entire dreadnought full of guards. But sometimes, one person with determination was enough. He moved through the corridors of the throne of night like a ghost. The ship was enormous, a city in space, but the intelligence reports had included maps. He knew where Zorvax would be. The throne room was at the very heart of the vessel, protected by layer after layer of security. Guards patrolled every passage. Automated defenses watched every junction. It should have been impossible for one human to penetrate so deep. But Marcus had spent 3 years learning how to do the impossible. He used the grenades to create diversions, drawing guards away from key checkpoints. He used the chaos of the battle outside to cover the sound of his movements. He used every trick he had learned in 3 years of war, every desperate gamble that had kept him alive. And finally, he stood before the doors of the throne room. They were massive, carved from some kind of black stone, covered in symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. 2 guards stood before them, elite warriors in armor that could withstand plasma fire. Marcus shot them both before they could react. The element of surprise, used at the right moment, was worth more than any weapon. He pushed open the doors and stepped inside. Zorvax was waiting for him. The tyrant sat on his throne, watching the battle unfold on a dozen holographic displays. He seemed unsurprised by Marcus's arrival, as if he had been expecting it all along. "The farmer from Earth," Zorvax said. "You are persistent, I will grant you that." Marcus raised his pistol. "It's over, Zorvax. Your fleet is being pushed back. Your empire is crumbling. Surrender now and I'll make sure you get a fair trial." Zorvax laughed. It was a terrible sound like ice cracking. "A trial? You truly are a strange creature. In all my centuries of conquest, no one has ever offered me such a thing." "That's because you've never met humans before." The tyrant rose from his throne, and Marcus saw how truly massive he was. 12 feet tall, with muscles like carved stone, radiating an aura of cold that made the air fog with every breath. "I have watched your species," Zorvax said, stepping forward. "Studied you, tried to understand what makes you so resilient. You are weak. Your bodies are fragile. Your lives are short. By every measure, you should be among the least significant beings in the galaxy." "And yet here I am," Marcus said, "standing in your throne room with a gun pointed at your head." "Yes, here you are." Zorvax stopped a few feet away, close enough that Marcus could see the cold fire burning in his eyes. "Do you know why I have conquered so many worlds, Marcus Webb? Why I have built an empire that spans half the galaxy? Because you're a monster who enjoys causing pain. No, because I understand something that most beings refuse to accept. The universe is cold and cruel and empty. It does not care about your hopes or your dreams or your petty moralities. Only power matters. Only strength endures." Marcus kept his weapon steady. "That's one way to look at things." It is the only way that corresponds to reality. Your species fights against me with such determination, but in the end, what will it matter? In 1,000,000 years, your sun will expand and consume your world. In 1 billion years, the galaxy will tear itself apart. Everything you love will turn to dust. Probably true, Marcus admitted. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to make things better while we're here. Zorvax tilted his head, genuinely curious. Why? What possible difference can your actions make against the indifference of eternity? I don't know, Marcus said honestly. Maybe none. Maybe everything we do is pointless in the grand scheme of things, but I know that when I help someone, they feel better. When I fight against injustice, some people get free. When I show kindness to a stranger, sometimes they pass it on. That's enough for me. Such small goals, such limited ambitions. Maybe, but I sleep well at night. Zorvax smiled, and it was almost sad. You are a fool, Marcus Webb. A brave fool, but a fool nonetheless. This conversation has been interesting, but it changes nothing. Even if you kill me, another will rise to take my place. The empire will continue. That's not what I've seen, Marcus said. I've seen beings who have lived under your rule for generations start to believe in freedom. I've seen enemies become allies because someone showed them there was another way. The empire is already crumbling, Zorvax. The question is whether you want to be there when it falls. You cannot kill me with that weapon. My body can withstand your primitive technology. Maybe, but I'm not planning to kill you. Zorvax frowned. Then why are you here? To give you a choice. The same choice I've given everyone we've captured. Surrender and face justice. Help us rebuild what you've destroyed. Spend the rest of your existence trying to make up for the harm you've caused. You offer mercy to the being who has conquered 400 worlds, who has eliminated entire species. I offer hope, Marcus said, even for you. For a long moment the tyrant was silent. The battle continued outside, flashing across the holographic displays, but inside the throne room, time seemed to stand still. Then Zorvax laughed again, and this time it was darker, more bitter. You truly are different from any species I have encountered, but you are wrong about one thing, Marcus Webb. What's that? I cannot be redeemed. I do not want to be redeemed. I am what I am, and I will never be anything else. He moved with impossible speed, faster than any creature his size should be able to move. Marcus fired, but the plasma bolt splashed harmlessly against Zorvax's armored hide. Then a massive hand closed around his throat and lifted him off his feet. You should have taken the shot to kill, Zorvax said. Your mercy is your weakness. Marcus struggled against the grip, feeling his vision start to dim. He had known this might happen. He had accepted the possibility of death long ago. But he wasn't done yet. With his last strength, he activated the emergency beacon on his wrist. A signal broadcast out from the throne of night, reaching every ship in the Resistance fleet. What did you do? Zorvax demanded. Gave them a target, Marcus gasped. Every weapon they have is now pointed at this room. Zorvax's eyes widened. He dropped Marcus and spun toward the displays, seeing the truth of it. Hundreds of ships were converging on the throne of night, ignoring the enemy fleet, focusing all their fire on the dreadnought. They'll destroy the ship, the tyrant said. They'll kill you along with me. Yeah, Marcus said, rubbing his throat. I know. You would sacrifice yourself. I told you we don't surrender, we don't quit, and we don't abandon our friends. He looked at the displays, at the ships rushing toward them. They're not just firing at you, Zorvax. They're firing for everyone you've hurt, everyone you've killed, every world you've burned. The first missiles impacted against the hull, and the throne of night shuddered. Alarms began wailing throughout the ship. More impacts followed, each one closer to the heart of the vessel. Zorvax looked at Marcus with something that might have been respect. You have defeated me, farmer, not with weapons or strategy, but with something I never understood: sacrifice, loyalty, love. "It's not too late," Marcus said, even as the ship began to break apart around them. "You can still choose." The tyrant shook his head slowly. "No, for me, it has always been too late." He turned and walked toward a hidden passage in the wall, his emergency escape route. But before he disappeared, he paused and looked back. "Perhaps," Zorvax said, "in another universe we could have been different, both of us." Then he was gone, and Marcus was alone in the crumbling throne room. He should have been afraid. He was about to die after all. But somehow, all he felt was peace. He had done what he came to do. He had shown the galaxy that even the greatest tyrant could be challenged. He had given hope to billions of beings who had never dared to hope before. It was enough. The final explosion tore through the throne of night, and Marcus Webb closed his eyes. Marcus opened his eyes to bright lights and unfamiliar sounds. For a moment, he thought he was dead, that this was whatever came after. But then he felt the pain in his body, the ache of broken bones and burned flesh, and he knew he was still alive. "He's awake," someone shouted, and then there were faces around him, human and alien, all looking down with expressions of relief and joy. "How?" he managed to croak. Alina pushed through the crowd, her eyes wet with tears she refused to shed. "The Ilari. They flew a shuttle into the throne room just before the final explosion, pulled you out through the wreckage." "The ship destroyed. Zorvax escaped, but we've confirmed that his fleet is in full retreat. The Empire is fracturing. Word has spread across the galaxy about what happened here." Marcus tried to sit up, but gentle hands pushed him back down. He looked around and saw that he was in a medical bay, probably on the Liberty. The faces watching him were a mixture of species, all of them part of the resistance. "How many did we lose?" he asked. Alina's expression grew somber. "Many. The Groks lost half their fleet. The Velthari lost their flagship and everyone aboard. We lost 24 human ships." She paused. "But we saved the Groks' home world. We evacuated the civilians, and we struck a blow against the Empire that will echo for generations." Marcus nodded slowly. Every victory came with a cost. He had learned that lesson long ago. "And the refugees?" he asked. "The beings from the fortress, the Ilari." "Safe, all of them. They're calling it the miracle at Relios. They're saying that humans and their allies stood against 50,000 ships and won." "We didn't win, not yet." "No, but we showed them it was possible. That's what matters." Marcus thought about Zorvax's words in the throne room, about the indifference of the universe, the meaninglessness of mortal actions. The tyrant had seen only darkness and had tried to become darkness himself. But Zorvax had been wrong. The universe wasn't just cold and cruel. It was also full of beings who cared for each other, who sacrificed for strangers, who kept fighting even when victory seemed impossible. "Get me a communication channel," Marcus said. "I want to talk to the fleet." Alina hesitated. "You need rest." "I'll rest later. Right now people need to hear from me." She nodded and helped him sit up, then activated a comm unit that broadcast to every ship in the resistance. "This is Marcus Webb," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I know many of you are hurting right now. We've lost friends and family and comrades. We've paid a terrible price for what we achieved today." He paused, looking at the faces around him, human and alien alike. "But I want you to remember something. Before today, most of the galaxy believed that Zorvax was unstoppable, that no one could challenge his power, that the conquered would always be conquered. We proved them wrong. Not just humans, all of us. The Groks who fought for their home world, the Velthari who flew halfway across the galaxy to help, the Ilari who risked everything to save lives. Every species that stood with us today showed that the tyrant's reign can be challenged." He thought about the message he wanted to send, the idea he wanted to plant in the minds of beings across the galaxy. The war isn't over. Zorvax is still out there and he will try to rebuild his power. There will be more battles, more losses, more sacrifice. But I believe with everything I am that we can win this fight. Not because we're stronger than them, not because we have more ships or better weapons, but because we fight for something worth fighting for. Freedom, hope, the idea that every sentient being deserves to live without fear. He took a deep breath, feeling his injuries protest. When I was a farmer in Kansas, I never imagined I would be here, leading a rebellion against a galactic tyrant. I never wanted to be a soldier or a hero. I just wanted to grow wheat and watch the sunset and live a simple life. But sometimes the universe doesn't give you a choice. Sometimes you have to stand up and fight, not because you want to, but because it's the right thing to do. That's what being human means. And that's what I've seen in all of you, no matter what species you are. The willingness to sacrifice, the refusal to give up, the belief that tomorrow can be better than today. So rest, heal, mourn the ones we've lost, and then get ready to fight again, because this war isn't over until every world in the galaxy is free. He closed the channel and leaned back, exhausted. Alina helped him lie down again. That was good, she said quietly. They needed to hear that. I meant every word. I know, that's what makes you different, Marcus. You actually believe this can work. He smiled slightly. Don't you? She was quiet for a long moment. I do now. After today, how could I not? Over the next few months, the galaxy changed. The Battle of Relios had proven that the Empire could be beaten, and that knowledge spread like wildfire. Resistance cells that had been dormant for decades came to life. Conquered species that had given up hope began to fight back. Even some of Zorvax's own forces started to defect. Soldiers who had never known any life but service to the tyrant now questioning whether there might be another way. The human-led resistance became something larger, a coalition of dozens of species united by shared values rather than shared fear. They called themselves the Free Alliance, and their symbol was simple, a rising sun against a dark sky. Marcus recovered from his injuries slowly. The burns healed, the bones knit back together, but the experience in the throne room had changed him in ways that couldn't be measured. He had looked into the abyss and chosen hope. He had offered mercy to a monster and been nearly killed for it. And he didn't regret any of it. You know, he said to Alina one day, as they watched the fleet grow larger and larger around them, I still think about what Zorvax said, about the universe being cold and meaningless. It bothers you. No, it clarifies things. He turned to face her. He wasn't entirely wrong. The universe doesn't care about us. It doesn't have a plan or a purpose. It just exists. That sounds pretty bleak. Maybe, but it also means we get to decide what matters. We get to create our own meaning, our own purpose. That's what makes beings like us special. We're not following some grand cosmic design. We're writing our own story. Alina smiled. And what story are we writing? The best one I can think of. The story of how a bunch of misfits and refugees and former enemies came together to fight for freedom. How they faced impossible odds and refused to give up. How they showed the galaxy that hope is stronger than fear. That's a good story. It gets better, because it doesn't end with us. Every world we liberate, every being we inspire, they become part of the story too. They pass it on to their children, who pass it on to theirs. Centuries from now, beings we'll never meet will remember what we did here. That's assuming we win. Marcus looked out at the stars, at the vast darkness that surrounded them. Somewhere out there, Zorvax was rebuilding his forces, planning his revenge. The war was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, he felt certain about the outcome. We'll win, he said. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but eventually we'll win. Because the one thing tyrants never understand is that you can't kill hope. You can beat it down, burn it, scatter it to the winds, but it always comes back. It always finds a way. Alina nodded slowly. So what now? What's our next move? Now we do what humans have always done. We keep fighting. We keep hopping. We keep building something worth fighting for." He turned away from the window and walked toward the bridge, where his crew was waiting. Human and alien, former enemies and new friends, all of them united by a shared belief in something better. The war against the galactic tyrant would be long and hard. There would be more battles, more losses, more dark moments when victory seemed impossible. But Marcus Webb, the farmer from Kansas who had become the hero of the resistance, would face every challenge with the same stubborn determination that had carried him this far. Because that was what humans did. They fought for what they believed in. They refused to give up. They stood against impossible odds, and somehow, against all reason, they won. And across the galaxy, on worlds that had known nothing but darkness for generations, beings looked up at the stars and dared to hope. The story of Earth's hero had sparked something that could never be extinguished. 2 years later, the final battle came. The Free Alliance had grown beyond anything Marcus could have imagined in those early days on his farm. 300 species now flew under its banner. Thousands of ships filled the fleet. Worlds that had been conquered for centuries had thrown off their chains and joined the fight. But Zorvax had not been idle either. The tyrant had consolidated his remaining power, fortifying his core worlds, building new weapons of terrible destruction. He had learned from his defeats and adapted his strategies. The Empire was smaller now, but it was also more dangerous. The two forces met in the void between galaxies, in the empty darkness where no stars burned. Both sides knew that this battle would decide everything. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Liberty, surrounded by faces that had become family. Elena at his side as always. Jex the Velthari, the commander he had befriended years ago, now leading his own wing of the fleet. The Ilari woman from the fortress, who had become one of their most capable diplomatic officers. Grox warriors, Velthari engineers, Ilari healers, and humans of every background imaginable. "Final count," he asked. 6,000 ships, Elena reported, against their 8,000. Better odds than Relios, Marcus thought, but still not good enough to guarantee victory. "Communications from the enemy fleet," the signals officer announced. "They're hailing us." Marcus nodded, put it through. Zorvax appeared on the screen, unchanged from their last meeting. The same cold eyes, the same terrible beauty, the same aura of power and menace. "Marcus Webb," the tyrant said, "we meet again." "Zorvax, I'd hoped you'd take my advice and surrender while you had the chance. And I had hoped you would see reason and accept my offer of peace. We both seem to have been disappointed." Marcus glanced at the tactical display. The two fleets were holding position, waiting for the order to engage. Millions of beings on both sides were watching this conversation, knowing that their fates hung in the balance. "Why are you really calling?" Marcus asked. "We both know you're not going to surrender." "No," Zorvax agreed. "But I wanted to understand something before the end. You have accomplished more than any other being who ever opposed me. You have united species that have been enemies for millennia. You have inspired hope in creatures who had forgotten what hope meant. That's what humans do." "Yes, that is what I wanted to understand. How? Your species is young and inexperienced. Your technology is primitive. Your individual members are fragile and short-lived. By every measure, you should be insignificant." Marcus thought about the question seriously. It was something he had asked himself many times. "I think," he said slowly, "it's because we never stopped believing that things could be better. When we look at the universe, we don't see cold indifference. We see possibility. We see potential. We see a chance to build something meaningful, even if it only lasts for a little while. That is foolishness. The universe does not care about your beliefs." "Maybe not, but other beings do. When we show them that change is possible, when we fight for them and sacrifice for them and treat them with kindness, they start to believe too. That's how hope spreads. not through grand philosophy or cosmic truth, but through simple acts of courage and compassion. Zorvax was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, almost thoughtful. I have existed for 3,000 years, Marcus Webb. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched species evolve and go extinct. In all that time, I have never encountered anything like your people. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. The tyrant straightened on his throne. Whatever happens today, know that you have earned my respect. You have proven that there are things in the universe I do not understand. There's still time, Zorvax. You could choose differently. You could help us build instead of destroy. No, I am too old to change, and I have done too much to ever be forgiven. But perhaps, when I am gone, the beings who come after me will remember this conversation. Perhaps they will wonder if there could have been another way. Marcus nodded slowly. Then I guess this is goodbye. Goodbye, Marcus Webb of Earth. May your hope prove stronger than my despair. The screen went dark, and across the void, the enemy fleet began to move. The final battle lasted for 3 days. It was the largest military engagement in galactic history. Ships beyond counting clashed in the darkness, their weapons lighting up the void like artificial stars. Millions of beings fought and died, their sacrifices adding to a toll that would never be fully counted. Marcus flew in the thick of it just as he always had. He dodged enemy fire, destroyed targets, coordinated his forces with a skill born of countless battles. But this time was different. This time, he could feel the war ending around him. The Empire fought with desperate fury, but they were already broken. Too many of their soldiers had lost faith in their cause. Too many of their officers had seen the Free Alliance and wondered if there might be a better way. When the tide began to turn, it turned quickly. On the 3rd day, Marcus led a strike force against the Throne of Night. The dreadnought had been rebuilt since Relio's, bigger and more powerful than before. But its defenses were weakened by the battle, and the resistance fighters knew exactly where to strike. This time, when Marcus boarded the enemy flagship, he wasn't alone. Humans and aliens fought beside him, clearing the corridors, overwhelming the guards. They moved through the ship like a wave, unstoppable, inevitable. When they reached the throne room, they found Zorvax waiting for them. The tyrant stood alone, his guards dead or fled. He looked older somehow, diminished. The cold fire in his eyes had faded to embers. "You have won," Zorvax said. "My empire is finished, my fleet is destroyed, I have nothing left." Marcus stepped forward, his weapon raised but not firing. "Then surrender. Face trial for your crimes. Let the galaxy see that even the most powerful can be held accountable." "You would not kill me." "I've never wanted to kill anyone. I just wanted to protect the people I care about." Zorvax laughed softly. "How strange you are, Marcus Webb. After everything I have done, you still offer mercy." "That's who I am, that's who we are." The tyrant considered this for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached up and removed the crown from his head, a circlet of black metal studded with gems that had come from 100 conquered worlds. "Then I accept," he said. "I surrender to you and your alliance. I will face whatever justice you deem appropriate." He held out the crown and Marcus took it. The metal was cold in his hands, heavier than it should have been. "The war is over," Marcus said quietly. Around him, his companions began to cheer. The sound spread throughout the ship, then to the fleet beyond, then to the galaxy itself. Across thousands of worlds, billions of beings celebrated the end of tyranny. But Marcus just stood in the throne room, holding the crown of the fallen empire, thinking about all the paths that had led to this moment, and wondering what came next. The reconstruction took years, but it was the good kind of hard work. Marcus returned to Earth eventually, to the farm in Kansas that had been waiting for him. The wheat fields had been tended by neighbors in his absence, and the old tractor had finally been repaired by a nephew who had inherited his talent for machines. He didn't stay, of course. There was too much to do, too many worlds that needed help rebuilding. But he came back when he could, to walk among the crops and watch the sunset and remember who he had been before everything changed. Zorvax was tried before a galactic tribunal, the first of its kind. Representatives from every species he had conquered came to give testimony, to share their stories of suffering and loss. The trial lasted for a full year, and when it was over, the tyrant was sentenced to spend the rest of his existence helping to undo the damage he had caused. It wasn't forgiveness. Some crimes could never be forgiven, but it was something better than execution, something that pointed toward a different kind of future. The Free Alliance evolved into a galactic federation, a loose union of independent worlds committed to mutual defense and cooperation. There were conflicts and disagreements, as there always would be when countless species tried to work together. But the foundation had been laid for something lasting, something that could grow and adapt and survive. Marcus served as the first human ambassador to the Federation, though he never liked the title. He preferred to think of himself as what he had always been, a farmer from Kansas who had stumbled into something larger than himself. One day, many years later, he was walking through the capital of the Federation when a young alien approached him. She was Ilari, one of the generations born after the war, who had never known what it meant to live under the tyrant's rule. "Excuse me," she said nervously. "Are you Marcus Webb, the Marcus Webb?" He smiled, feeling the weight of his years. "That's me. I wanted to thank you. My grandmother was at the Battle of Relios. She told me stories about you, about how you inspired her to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless." "Your grandmother inspired herself. I just showed her it was possible." The young Ilari shook her head. "That's not how she tells it. She says you taught her that hope is stronger than fear, that kindness is more powerful than cruelty, that even in the darkest times one person can make a difference." Marcus looked at her, at this young being who represented everything they had fought for, a future where different species could meet as friends, where the children of the conquered could grow up free, where hope was not just a dream but a reality. "Do you believe that?" he asked. "I do now," she said, "because of you, because of what your generation accomplished." Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes, something that happened more easily in his old age. "Then do me a favor. Pass it on. Tell the stories to your children and have them tell their children. Make sure no one forgets what we learned." "What did we learn?" He looked up at the sky, at the countless stars that burned in the darkness, each one home to beings who had once lived in fear and now lived in hope. "That the universe is what we make of it," he said. "That we get to choose what kind of beings we want to be. That no matter how powerful the darkness seems, there's always a light waiting to be kindled. And that humans, with all our flaws and limitations, can sometimes be the ones to kindle it." The young Ilari nodded solemnly. "I will remember, I promise." She walked away, back to her life and her future, and Marcus watched her go. He was old now and tired, and he knew that his time was coming to an end. But he had no regrets. He had been a farmer from Kansas who had defied a galactic tyrant. He had been captured and beaten and nearly killed more times than he could count. He had watched friends die and enemies fall and hope rise from the ashes of despair. And in the end, he had helped build something that would outlast him. A galaxy where freedom mattered, where compassion was valued, where the least and lowest could stand up to the greatest and most powerful and say, with absolute conviction, "No." Marcus Webb turned and walked back toward the spaceport, where a shuttle was waiting to take him home to Kansas one last time. Above him, the stars burned bright, and somewhere among them, beings of every shape and size were living their lives in peace. Earth's hero had defied the galactic tyrant, and his bravery had sparked hope across the universe. That hope would never die.